to our training on document branding and accessibility for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. My name is Jana Ford, and I'm the Assistant Public Information Officer in the Public Information and Communications Unit here at DES. I'm joined by our Communications Specialist, Christina Minervini, who will be monitoring the chat today and helping to answer questions. The PIC unit in DES manages the agency's websites and overall branding and communication. And part of that responsibility is ensuring that the information and services we provide in digital format are accessible to people with disabilities. It's a legal requirement, but it's also a best practice that ultimately provides the best experience for all users. The objective for today's training is to inform our partners and stakeholders on what our publication branding and accessibility requirements are, and to provide the tools to help you meet these requirements. Hopefully, it will also help you in the work you do with other state agencies and municipalities, because as I'll explain later, these requirements, especially the accessibility requirements, are applied to all state and local governments. So if you work with other agencies, this will help you in your work with them as well. As I mentioned, our training is being recorded. I will pause for questions at various times, but I'm also happy to answer questions as we go along. Please feel free to raise your hand or enter your question in the chat. I do not want to let anybody fall behind, so if there's any moment where you need some clarity or have a question or need me to slow down and go over something again, please go ahead and let me know. So when you registered for this training, you watched a brief video that detailed what digital accessibility is and the laws that govern it. I'm just going to take a moment to summarize the key points as a bit of a refresher. So, digital accessibility is the practice of removing barriers to our online content and services for people with disabilities, and it's a requirement under federal law. The accessibility standards in place were developed to ensure that users are able to be aware of everything on the screen, navigate and keep track, I get that animation going, navigate and keep track using structure, read and understand everything that you're trying to convey, and use different types of devices to access that content. The governing laws are federal legal requirements under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, specifically Section 504 and Section 508, the Plain Writing Act, and most recently, there is a new Federal Department of Justice rule reinforcing these requirements with a deadline for state and local agencies to comply by April 24th of 2026. Now, we use the standards Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. Those are the standards that were put in place to instruct us how to comply with these laws. And the policy that the state put in place through the Department of Information Technology, which applies to all state agencies in New Hampshire, states that we must comply with the WCAG, specifically level 2.1, 2.1 level AA. So everything we talk about today is in keeping with those standards. But please keep in mind that there's more depth to it than I can cover in a 2-hour session. And as you can imagine, the best practices and standards are always evolving. They're trying to keep up with technology. So it's a good practice to check the WCAG website, which is provided in the resource document I sent to you, for details and updates and more in-depth information. They also have great tutorials on there. But if there's something that you didn't get quite answered in this training or in any of the other documentation we have, that's a wonderful resource for you to go to. They have some really great stuff. And I just want to say, as we go along, you will hear me using the acronyms ADA and WCAG a lot. So I just want you to get used to hearing that. Kind of shorthand for us here is saying ADA compliant. So we'll often ask, is that document ADA compliant when we're being asked to post it to our website? But that's shorthand for all of these, the Rehab Act, the Plain Writing Act, everything under the WCAG. So I want to make that clear because, I get caught doing shorthand quite a bit. So we'll talk about the scope of this training a little bit before we get started. The main focus today is the formatting of publications that are created for DES and owned by the end of the day by DES. But they apply to any online content that's posted by agency staff and especially to any state websites. So regardless of whose it is. So for example, if you were to have a slide deck from a presentation that you wanted us to post on our website, or you had a report that belongs to someone else like a lake association, but you wanted us to host it on our website, it has to be ADA compliant for us to post it. Anything that we post personally as staff to our state websites is under this jurisdiction. So when we're talking about what we want you to learn here and hopefully get out of this is if you look up any information about digital accessibility, you'll see the same advice is it's always better to create your content with accessibility in mind rather than fixing it to be accessible later. I can tell you as someone who's the last line of defense before something gets posted on our website, it's by far the biggest challenge trying to remediate a document and make it ADA compliant if certain steps weren't taken in creating it. And I think you'll see that maybe later on in this training as I show you some things. These steps will be highly important. And again, I'll reiterate that we are going to look at document formatting, but all this basic requirements are across the board for publications, whether they're web pages, apps, forms, social media, videos. You know, we're going to be talking about color usage and hyperlinking and font and spacing, those kinds of things. Those types of requirements are not strictly to documents. So you can kind of apply what you're learning here to more than just a Word or PDF document. And I am going to switch screens because we're going to start going over the workbook after this. But I would love to let you ask any questions while I do the switching to kind of fill in that empty space for me. Let me stop sharing. And no questions so far. That's good. Yeah.
Jenna, I have a question. This is Michelle Tremblay, and my question is for documents that are old that may have been, for instance, digitized hard copies. I know that there was a push to get some of that preserved within the department and for other agencies. How will that be handled? Because clearly they are image files and they're not going to be ADA compliant. Probably, maybe I'm wrong about that, but how will that be handled?
You're talking about older documents?
Right, where they've been torn apart, scanned in an effort to rid the building of paper so it doesn't collapse under the weight of itself.
Yes, the
They have,
digitizing, yes.
yeah, and they have a value, you know, when you're doing research and you're trying to trace back to previous actions on a particular water body, let's say. So I was just wondering how that would be handled because if they can't be posted on the agency's website, is there another way to make them compliant or is there another way for them to be accessed so that they're not lost?
It's a great question. And we deal with that a lot. We have a lot of different bureaus who are actively digitizing their archives, and some of them are putting them into folders here at DES, but some of them are posting online. Septic records, for example, are being digitized and put online. There is an exemption for archive documents under the new DOJ rule that goes into effect in April. So as long as they are kept for reference or record keeping and they aren't used for active services, like say forms or guidance documents that we point people to for permitting purposes, for example, those would be high priority that we would need to make accessible. But for reference and record keeping, there is an exemption. That said, we do have to post disclaimers and we do have to make ourselves available to provide the information within those documents for somebody who can't access it. So that's where we make sure to have contact information. If say for we have a database for the septic records, we have contact information that says if if you are in need of accommodation with this file, contact this person. And then we have to train ourselves to be available to that person if they do call us and ask us for help, that we will either provide it in a format that works for them, writing it out, sending it in an email, reading it over the phone. So there are those considerations for those, and for a lot of those documents are not able, like septic plans, to be made fully accessible by a screen reader, for example. Christina? Oh, we've got some questions in the chat, huh?
Yeah, we've got quite a few that just came into the chat.
All right, I'll let you read them off so it gets recorded.
Perfect. Okay, so the first one is, how does that apply to maps included in documents? And then in addition, also, how does that apply to documents such as subdivision plans registered with the county?
So the subdivision plans, I believe I kind of covered with when I was talking about the septic records. Tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm not thinking of the same thing. And then what was the first part? Sorry.
The first part was about maps included in documents.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So there are a lot of different scenario or considerations for maps that need to take place. A lot of these things you can carry over to maps. Font usage, making sure that text is legible. Color usage is very important with maps. You have all the scientific standards that maps need to have, but then for accessibility, I think the biggest things are color usage and thinking about people with different forms of color blindness. And we will talk about that later, and some tools you have online where you can actually test the colors and see what they would look like together. And yes, having legible labels and titles and all of that.
And then the next question, do these guidelines apply to applications or platforms that are hosted by other entities and then linked onto the NHDES website?
If it's not a DES quote unquote owned space, then no. And I will say, like I said, any state and local government has these requirements. So, but if we are linking to somebody else's platform, we do not have any authority or governance over that, and that we're exempt from that. But if it's a outside party that is hosting something for us, so it's our database or our forms website, for example, then and we have our content there, then it needs to be compliant.
The next one is about social media, so I can take a stab at this one. So the question is, do these guidelines apply to any graphics posted on social media? And the answer is yeah, we want to make sure that all of the graphics, as well as the text that's posted with them, are compliant. So for social media, this would include the plain language. The color contrast is huge with the graphics, as well as the sans serif fonts. I would say the only difference would be the 11-point size in a graphic on social media. That would look pretty small. So we would want to bump up the font size to make sure it's easily readable on a screen. But yeah, for the most part, everything else, it's going to be, social media is going to be included as well. And then one more. For those documents that are scanned, do you guys run OCR in PDF and update the information in the content and tagging panels of Adobe Acrobat?
Yes, and if you're talking about the digitized like archive documents in particular, or just any documents that are scanned, um, yes, the ideal would be that they're scanned in OCR, and for those who might not know, that's optical character recognition, and if your scanner has that ability to scan it in that way, that's the best way. If not, then using Adobe Acrobat tools, you can run an OCR scanner on the PDF. And that's basically, without that, the PDF is one big image and cannot be read by a screen reader whatsoever. It just looks like a photo or a figure. So OCR makes it so that all the text on that page is readable. And if there are our documents that we are scanning in, we do some minimal tagging. Like I said, some of those documents are not able to be made completely compliant, but we can do some basic things like with the document properties and the tags to make sure that they are basically readable and have convey some information. But if they're documents that are not ours that are being submitted to us, we don't have the ability at this point to alter or fix those documents, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to do these education and outreach campaigns so that things submitted to us are compliant when they get to us or close enough, so that we don't have to do anything to them. And I will say,
Sorry, go ahead.
Hopefully at the end of this, if we have time, there's a lot to go over, but if we have time, I will be able to show you a little bit of that on the PDF. I wanted to be able to get to the PDF side of things after we talk about some of these requirements at the end of the session.
That's it for the chat.
Great, I love it. I know the scope and everything on these rules can be kind of confusing, and it's helpful to get some clarity on that. So if you think of anything else while you're going along, hold it for the next question session or put it in the chat and we'll get to it. Okay, so this is the workbook session of the training. We're going to go over starting with just like the basic requirements and work our way down into some more meaty stuff. I will say that we labeled this a branding and accessibility training because, of course, we also have our own needs as DES to have documents that are created for us or any publications created for us to be meeting our branding requirements, which is, obviously our font styles and our logo usage and everything. So it's going to be sometimes a mixed bag where I'm going to tell you these are the requirements of WCAG. So those are the accessibility requirements, but then also DES has a preferred branding on top of that, right? So for example, when we talk about typography, WCAG requires to use sans serif fonts and to be at a minimum of 11 point, even though I think 12 point might be the new standard. 11 point is the definite bottom. And to use left justification, which means having your text flush left and not going all the way across the screen. So you've got that jagged edge there. And not using underlines for hyperlinks. So this is a kind of a show you what it should look like and what it shouldn't look like. Underlines should be for hyperlinks only. If you see underline, you change the emphasis to bold is preferred, italics is okay. But for DES, our branding requirement is for it to be Calibri font. Does not need to be Calibri font for your own work anywhere else, but if you're doing something for DES, that is our branded font, 11 point Calibri. Then we talk about spacing. Line spacing is really important. So I talked about legibility. A lot of this is about legibility, right? So if you think screen read or accessibility is just about what a screen reader will do for somebody, then these are examples of how that's not the case, right? We're also talking about people with neurodivergent capabilities, and we're talking about eyesight, like low vision versus no vision. So there's all different kinds of disabilities out there. They run the gamut. And when we're talking about legibility, we're trying to reach those users who might have low vision or some neurodivergent issues. And so line spacing helps with legibility of the paragraph, and then having a set spacing between the paragraphs. So for DES, the standard is to have a 1.08 spacing between the lines, and an 8-point spacing between the paragraphs. Now, if you look at the do's and don'ts here, you will see they look the same, exactly the same. So what is my problem? Well, it turns out in hidden characters, you can see a big difference. And if you've never worked in the hidden character world before, I actually have this turned on all the time in my documents. So I'm always looking for culprits of extra paragraph marks and extra tabs and spaces. And it's this little guy up here. And when you click on that, you see all of the markings, right? These are the hidden characters. We've got tabs. The arrows are tabs. These are the, when you hit enter, the paragraph breaks or carriage returns, as some people call them. And then you see the little dots between the words. Those are all the spaces, right? So that's the difference. This one is correct. This one is not. Now, if you go down a little bit further, we have an exercise to show kind of how to fix that. And it's really pretty simple, and it's that paragraph spacing I was showing you up above, which ours is to have it 8 points between paragraphs. So if you delete your paragraph break, right, and now that's a problem, right? It's not very readable. Well, you want to set your paragraph spacing so you can highlight the text and go up to paragraph or layout. Layout will be the easier route for you because the spacing is actually right there. And you click on after, so it's a spacing after a paragraph, 8, and hit enter. And now you have the space that you need between these paragraphs without that extra carriage return or paragraph break. And that's something that you can set up as a default in your documents, so that you don't have to do this every time. You want to get out of the habit of when you don't have the paragraph after spacing set up, and this is definitely something that we've all done for years and years, is you just hit enter twice and then start typing up your new thing. And then that's creating those paragraph breaks. And what that is doing is actually having a tag in once you convert it to a PDF, it's a tag for every paragraph break. And up here, it would read tab, tab, tab. So every time there's an arrow, it would read tab. So it can get really confusing to someone using a screen reader. So that's why you want to get in the habit of having your spacing turned on by default. And you can do that by, if you open up the pop-up box, like the little arrow down here, and you put your spacing in that you want to be your paragraph spacing at all times. See, I've got my line spacing already set up as multiple 1.08. Oopsie. Then you can come over here and just click set as default and say all documents. Okay. Oops. And now, what did I do? We'll see how that messes me up later, but maybe I'll just do a little Control Z and pretend that never happened. So you can do that, so it's always set up, and you can get it out of the habit of hitting enter a couple of times. Another time this comes up as an issue is, I showed as an example here, is when you have like a title page, or you have, some space you need to make to get down to the next. Yeah, I definitely messed that guy up, but that's okay. We'll get there. Okay. That you would just hit enter a bunch of times to get to, I know what I did. To get to the next page, right? And I think everybody probably knows about section breaks and page breaks, But that's really important to get in the habit of doing and not doing these extra paragraph returns, right? So you would just get rid of all of those and you'd come here and you'd go up to layout, breaks, next page. And when you have hidden characters on, you can even see where those section breaks are. So they'll show up like that. And I have a title page as an example on the next one, just to show like this is probably a place where we see the culprit a lot of extra paragraph breaks, because you're trying to create all this space between the title and the prepared by and the information at the bottom. And as you can see here, we don't have all of that, and that's because we use that layout spacing to create the space. So like here, when I click on this, you can see there's a big old space. You can use as much space as you want. So really use it as a layout tool to give yourself the space you want without using the Enter key or even the Tab key to get what you need out of there. And as you can see, there's another section breakdown here, so there's no worries. I really need to fix this. See if that helped. Not really, but that's okay. Is right justified okay as well, or only left justified? It really should only be left justified. Again, for like just readability, I think if you were to do left, for a lot of people, it wouldn't, because we read left to right, it might be a little confusing for some people. I will say that you can be a little creative with certain spaces, like if you had a pull quote in a document or something like that, that you wanted to give it a little bit of make it stand out from the other text, then you certainly could do that, and you could use centered. But for standard paragraph text in a large document, left justified would be the way to go. Correct. So centered for a title page, yes. So like those standout items, that is absolutely okay. I think the best way to think about it is the paragraph text, the like chunks, right, of text, that those should all be this kind of styling, if that helps. So that is spacing. I didn't show you the tabs. There are a couple of ways to handle when you want to have a tab go all the way over. So I'm just deleting these. So there's only one. And my quick and dirty way to do it is when you have the one tab there, is I come up to the ruler and I just click down with my mouse and hold. And when there's a line appears like that, I drag that tab stop over to where I want it. So just keeping it up there on the ruler. And then you see you've got the one tab. One tab is okay, no more than one. Another handy thing about the spaces here in the paragraph is that we do single spaces between sentences, not doubles. So if you see a bunch of these doubles, you want to get rid of those, which you can do with a find and replace, by the way, so it doesn't have to be too cumbersome. But two spaces after a sentence is should have died with the typewriter, to be honest with you. So it's something that people still get used to, but that is standard now. So I'll move on to images, but definitely keep asking questions if you have more. So the WCAG requirements for images is having alternative text, or what we call alt text for short, for almost all. I'll talk about exemptions in a minute. And the important thing to know about alternative text is that it's different than captions. Alternative text is just what the screen reader is going to read when it gets to that image in a document. And you want to be very descriptive of what's in the image. So a difference would be, and I'll show you an example below, if you have a caption, let me just show you now so we can have a visual on that guy. I'll go down a little bit. So like this one right here is a good example. If you had this in a report and you wanted to write a caption for it, you would of course be writing down everybody's name. You'd say from left to right, and you'd name every single person in there. Say so-and-so and so-and-so pose for a photo at their speech crafter graduation. For alt text, you're not giving that kind of detail. You're just actually describing the image, the visual that you have here. So your alt text for this one would be a group of people pose for a photo at the speech crafter graduation. So you don't have to, that's kind of the difference between a caption and an alt text. Captions are not always required. Something like this would be, right? You have people in your photo and they're clearly seen and it's not like the back of their head or whatever. You want to be able to describe them. Something like this that you might say is more decorative or you don't, unless you're having a document about this event that this was at, you really don't need to have a caption. You can just add the alt text and that's it. Moving up a little bit, sorry, I got out of order there. The exception for requiring alt text is if an image does not enhance the information at all. And a good example of that is if you have an instructional document, like this is a picture of an instructional document, not to get too meta, but if you have an instructional document that has step 1, step 2, step 3, right, in text, clearly written, and then it has an image or screenshot of where to find that button, right? Like find the button that says this, and then you have a screenshot of that. You don't have to provide alt text for that screenshot because that screenshot is considered a visual aid for the visual user. The person using a screen reader, it will not convey any more information for them to say screenshot of the help button, right? So what you can do when you have something like that is you can actually mark it as decorative, and I'll show you how to do that. And when you mark it as decorative, the screen reader actually skips over it. It just goes from step 1 to step 2, and it doesn't even read off that there's an image there at all. So those are the exemptions for alt text. Decorative also can sometimes mean a background image maybe, or something that's like completely off to the side and really not, it really is there just for decoration and nothing else. Sometimes people get a little confused with that, where say they have an image on the cover page and they mark it as decorative. And yes, in some capacity it is decorative, but the other thing to keep in mind with that is that there are low vision users who use screen readers, and there are situations where they can see there's an image there, they just can't see what it is. And if there's no alt text for it, they might get a little frustrated and confused. Like, I know there's an image there, I want to know what that is, but it's saying there isn't one. So it's decorative is not something that we use just like, oh, nobody needs to know what this image is. It's more for when it really has no bearing on conveying the intent of the document or the information in the document. Now, to add alt text, you can right-click on any image in a Word document and go to View Alt Text and type it in right here. Avoid generating alt text. Microsoft has some really great tools, and AI help with accessibility is one of them, but their generated alt text is rarely helpful. Oftentimes it's like 1 or 2 words, and it doesn't convey the information at all. So we avoid that. I would actually encourage you to check the alt text in your documents, even if your accessibility checker says all good, everything is alt text. Just kind of scroll through and check them to make sure that they are actually accurate and helpful. And so this is another example of something that doesn't have caption information, right? It's not saying who these people are. It's not giving like details about this event. It's just literally describing what is in the photo. And then if you look at this one I have marked as decorative. So you're still opening up that alt text area and you're just checking this off right here. Another example of decorative would be icons, right? So if you have like, maybe you have um, a bulleted list, but you chose to use images as the icons for each paragraph or something, that's not going to be helpful to say, you know, checkbox, right? Like say it's a check mark or something like that. So those are the kinds of things that aren't going to be helpful to the user and can be marked as decorative. I will have some do's and don'ts here on the proper kind of alt text. So one thing is if it is an image with words in it, the alt text should say those words. So that's conveying that information. If you're using our logo, this is the proper alt text for our logo at all times. We don't use the acronym. And that's another one that sometimes people think can be marked as decorative, but it actually is a pretty big branding need for us to have our the whole reason we have our agency logo on all of our publications is so that people know whose publication it is. And if someone's using a screen reader and it skips over that, then unless it's also on the page in writing, then we've missed our branding opportunity for that group of people. So it's always important to add alt text to our logo and to use this full name. And then here's an example of alt text for graphs, you know, graphs and bar graphs, circle graphs, anything like that. We need to have alt text for. And the important thing is, like, here's a don't, right? It's just say, oh, this is a graph of an increase. Well, we want to convey, and a really good way to think about alt text is conveying the information to the user. Like, what is the information you're trying to convey? If they can't get that information from the text of the document, so if you have a report and you just had 3 paragraphs describing all of this data, and then you have a graph, which is essentially a visual aid to, you know, show that data, then you don't have to get into detail on every number and every set inside of that. You can just state what it is showing. So this would be an example of that. Now, if that information is not anywhere else in the report, then you're going to have to think of ways to either include it all in the alt text or maybe have a companion document or an appendix or something where you're providing that information. So we want to make sure that the information we're conveying to the visual user is also getting conveyed to someone using a screen reader. And we've already talked about these. I see we have some questions in the chat. Anything I should go over about alt text or image use? I think someone wanted to know about inline.
Yeah, there were a couple questions about inline with text, if images should be inline, as well as if an image is marked as decorative, does it have to be inline?
No, it does not. That's a good question. Yeah, so inline will come later. I have some examples of that. I appreciate you asking. So I'll show how we usually handle that and explain it for anybody who doesn't know. But if it's marked decorative, it does not need to be inline. And that's another, that reminded me as well. Sometimes if we have shapes on our documents, so we have maybe line shapes, if we're doing forms or signature lines or just for some decorative reason, you can mark those as decorative. You want to mark those as decorative because if you don't, then it's going to require alt text for every single one of those. And it's certainly not helpful for someone using a screen reader to hear line shape over and over again. So anytime you're drawing on shapes for lines or any shapes for any reason, they don't need to be in line, and they can be marked as decorative, or should be marked as decorative. Great questions. Yes.
There was also one more question. In regards to text, what would you do for a chart or a table?
A chart or a table. So charts and tables definitely should always be inserted in the document and not images, first of all. So if it's an image of a table or an image of a chart, you're going to want to find a way to get it on the page, like the text on the page in a table, so that it gets all tagged properly when it gets converted to a PDF. That's first. There is a place to add alt text to charts and tables, and those really can just be a one-line summary of what that is a table of. So it can be basically the title of the table with maybe a little information. I don't have an example off the top of my head. I do later on in the workbook. Maybe when we get back to that part, we can talk about what an alt text for that table would be in my examples.
Yeah,
go ahead.
And another question just came in, which I can answer. If using alt text for an image or a video on social media, should we also use alt text in the comment, or is just in the image or video sufficient? Just in the image or the video should be sufficient. So when you're posting it and kind of editing it and getting it ready to publish, there's a spot where you can add alt text, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to add anything more in the comments or anything like that. And then one question just came in. You mentioned having alt text for the brand logo. What if that figure is repeated numerous times, say in a header or a footer on every page? Should it have alt text in all instances?
Great question. And circling back on that social media one too, Christina, it's also really good to point out that if you have a graphic for social media that has a lot of text in it, and sometimes it does, like it's a flyer looking thing with like dates and times and that kind of thing, you want to make sure to include that in the post as well, or in the alt text, to make sure that that doesn't get lost for someone using a screen reader. Yeah, so that's a great question, Brian. If you have anything in the headers or footer area of your document, those actually do not get tagged or read, or tagged in a PDF and therefore read by a screen reader. You can go in and tag them later once your document's been converted to a PDF. If there was information in the header or footer that you wanted tagged and readable by a screen reader, but by default, they don't get tagged and they don't get read. So you don't need to add alt text for that logo. Of course, you would want that logo in that first spot outside of the header or footer, like maybe on a title page or something like that, so it gets read that first time. But if you're repeating it on every page, the best practice is to put it, I would say, in the header or footer, because obviously it's easier and it'll be repeated for you, and then you don't have to add alt text to it. Hopefully, when we get to the PDF part, I'll be able to kind of to show you some of the tags and how that works as well. Okay, great. I love these questions. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so moving on to color usage. So the WCAG requires that we have high color contrast, but not extreme. Extreme, think, neon colors, bright red with black text is one we see a lot of. Also, that color is never used alone for emphasis. So if you want to make text red as a warning for someone, reading your document, we have some examples down here. You can do that. There's nothing that says you can't do that. You just can't do that alone. For those people with color blindness that can't see red, they're not going to get that emphasis, right? So if you want to do that, you want to also make it bold or italics, preferably bold, like I said before, so that someone who can't really discern that color does see that there's an emphasis added to that information. You also want to avoid patterns and backgrounds with text as much as possible. And if you're going to have a pattern in the background, you're going to want to use kind of a color screen behind the text to make sure that it's not lost. So you kind of put a white background or transparent white or black or something like that, gray maybe, behind the text to kind of keep it readable. It's all about legibility and color contrast. So we're going to look at these resources in just a minute, but just a couple more of these examples here. If you're going to use a color background on text, the kind of rule of thumb is to avoid mid-tone colors. So if you're looking at the color in Word, mid-tone, right, would be these kinds of ones right here in the middle. You want to either do a light color with black text or, some kind of dark text, or the dark color with white text. You want to have those kinds of extremes there. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to read the text in those colors. So these are good examples of how to do that. Again, this is how you want to do it in the text. And then when you have color backgrounds, you want to make sure, especially, here, this is my my little branding thing here, but this is how we would love for our logos to be used when there's color backgrounds. And, you can apply that to any other kind of logos or images that you're working with, is having a white logo on a dark background and then a full color on a light background, and a full color that has a transparent background. So you might, I don't think I have an example down here, but you might have seen many times a logo which would have the white square and then the gray background. We really want to avoid that white square. We have our logos available with this transparent background, so that white square is gone. It just looks cleaner and more professional. And then here, of course, are the ways not to use color, right? I just said like a light color with white text. It's not going to work. And if you're in Word, you see these little guys. That's because I have auto accessibility checker turned on. So this little guy is saying, this is a problem. And I click on it and it actually will tell me right now, hey, you might want to try one of these instead. I personally don't think that looks any better, but I guess it passes the contrast check. And then here's an example of how not to use a logo or image on a dark background, right? Something that gets washed out and you can barely see it. That's not helpful at all. And I don't know what that's missing alt text. Yes. So that's a nice little handy feature if you haven't checked that out in Word. So we have a couple of really good resources online when you're needing to check contrast. And this one right here is actually from the same group that works with the WCAG. And this is something that you can actually just check your colors. Let me see if I can do this in real time. Do the color picker. So if you go to color picker, and well, actually, we'll do background first. And you click on the little eyedropper guy. You should be able to come to your document and hover over the color you want. Click it. There it is right there. And then for this one, it's white. So, well, that's black. Sorry. Bum, 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 bum. So then you can say, okay, my background is black. My foreground, meaning my text in this case, is white. Does it pass? And then if you scroll down, you can see that it passes. Of course it does. I mean, come on, it's black and white. But you can see that it passes everything. And this is using level 2A and level 3A, We only, at this point, are required to pass level AA, but AAA is better. So, you know, at some point we will be required to do AAA, so we might as well pass them all now if we can. And then this is just distinguishing between normal text like paragraph text and large text like headers. So you can kind of look and see, well, if this was a header, if it didn't pass this one, it would be okay as long as it passed the large text. So that's a really good tool to use. And then this one is great for color blindness, especially if you are working on graphs or maps. So you can actually take your image. I did not prepare a good image, but we will find something useful maybe. Probably not. I dropped in a seal, like somebody's state seal earlier, and that was, I'll do it again, Vermont state seal. So if you can actually just choose your file. So if you have something you've created and you want to check to see what it will look like to different people, you know, zoom out a little bit, and you can click through all the different types of color blindness and see what happens to the colors in there and see if there's any chance that one of those is going to look wrong or not be able to see what you're trying to convey in that graph. A good rule of thumb with graphs and charts and things is to just have high contrast colors and almost avoid using the same color just in a bunch of different shades like blues, because depending on how many different colors you're using, the differentiation between one shade and another is going to be really difficult, especially for somebody who is only seeing in black and white, for example. So if it's like two shades of blue right next to each other that are hard to distinguish in black and white, it's going to be hard to distinguish for them. So that's something to keep in mind. And another quick test is actually to print it out in black and white and see if there's enough contrast between those colors when they're in black and white, or if it might get confusing. So I definitely suggest using those tools for color. And I think that's all I had to say about color. And let me see if there are any other questions.
Yeah, there was one question that came up in the chat about the color contrast ratio. Mm-hmm. So they're asking for NHDES. Does the color contrast ratio still need to be 4.5 to 1 for text and images of text, and 3 to 1 for large scale text? And then they said that AA level.
Yep. 2.1 AA level. Yes, that's correct. The color blindness website doesn't. Anyone else will get to work? The one I was just on.
Also works for me too.
Wonder if it's a browser issue. Sometimes maybe they work in different browsers better than others. I know I'm using Microsoft Edge, but I don't think I've tried it in the other ones. It should work in Chrome.
Yeah, I have it open in Chrome and it's working okay for me.
Tried Edge in Firefox. I don't know. We'll circle back and see. Okay. Chrome for the win, hopefully. All right. I will move on to hyperlinks, but definitely anybody have other questions about color, let me know. Hyperlinks are always need to be embedded in descriptive link text, and we never want to use here or click here as link text, and I'll explain why. Because with people, especially people using screen readers, oftentimes they have a lot of shortcuts that they just know. Using their keyboards, they can they can tab through headings, they can tab through links and certain things like that. So if they're in a document and they have, they know what they're looking for and they're like clicking through and they're clicking from hyperlink to hyperlink, and each hyperlink says click here or more information. That's another one if you have a document with a bunch of the same link text, click here, whatever. Also, if it says click here, but that person didn't actually read the paragraph before the link, they're not going to know. There's no context for what that link is taking them to. So it's something to really avoid at all times. And it's also a reason why the descriptive link text is so important. So um, you want to know the destination of that hyperlink. You want to make it very clear what that is. So if somebody gets to that link, they know exactly where they're going. So an example of that down here, you could say go to des.nh.gov or go to the NHDES website. But unless earlier in the paragraph, or actually anyway, but you want to be a little more specific, like you're going to the asbestos management webpage. So spell that out for them so that they know that that's where that link is going. Of course, we don't include full URLs like this anymore in our documents. One of the reasons is because screen readers will read every single letter of a URL, and it can be confusing and not helpful to somebody. As you can imagine, some URLs out there with codes and things like that just doesn't explain to them where they're going. And then here's another don't example of using click here. So some examples of what to do with this information is if you have hyperlinks spelled out like this, you want to say, okay, let's change up this sentence. I mean, this one is pretty simple, right? You can cut that out and say, are available on one stop. One stop's the destination. Sorry, I'm using my keyboard shortcuts. So you can right click on that, go to link, and paste that URL right in there, and then take out that preposition. Same thing with this, right? It would be data mapper, would be the text that you'd want to hyperlink here. Here's an example of one that might not be super helpful because it's not fully descriptive of where it's going, right? And it's actually not the DES website. This is one of those situations, the Just FOIA, where that's the old file review. My goodness, don't look at that. But it would be like an outside platform from our main DES website. So to be really clear, we would want to, I would copy, nope, I didn't want to do that. I will copy the hyperlink, and I would actually make it this text right here, a file review request form, because that is literally where that link is taking them. So I would make that the descriptive link text. Please ignore that URL. That is many moons ago. And then remove this one. So actually, it doesn't have to be, you might say website over here, but it doesn't have to be the link. You want it to be the actual destination of the link right there. Another bonus link information here is on hyperlinking phone numbers. So obviously we hyperlink emails all the time. This is a big thing that we do now with all of our documents and online content is hyperlinking phone numbers because if you think about it, I think it's upwards of 90-something% of all web users are using mobile devices and tablets to access our information. So when they're using their mobile devices, think about in your own life when you are on a website or somewhere on a document and you see a phone number, it's almost habit now, reflex to tap that phone number to make it pop up and make you make a phone call, right? Like, hey, that's convenient. And then when you tap on it and it doesn't do anything, it's actually kind of frustrating. Why, in this day and age, why can't I just tap on a phone number and call? And that's actually what this hyperlinking of phone numbers does. So if we hyperlink all the phone numbers on our content, then people who are accessing it from their phones can actually call right there and not have to try to, do the dialing one by one. I mean, that's so old school, right? So I'll just show you really quickly what that looks like. There's a code to it. Much like if you look at this pop-up here, this URL for an email always has mail to, no spaces, colon, email, phone number, same deal. Well, not same deal, but it has a code, which is TEL colon +1. So it should always be that. And then the phone number. Now, um, you want to take out the parentheses for the area code. Dashes are okay or no dashes. From what I've discovered, either dash or no dash, it gets you there. The parentheses are not okay. So take those out and then you can have that like that. And then you have a hyperlinked phone number. So that's very important. The question often comes up about printing. I don't know if that's come up in the chat yet. So often the question about print documents. This document is meant for print. We want towns to print it out and put it on a bulletin board, that sort of thing. We have a couple of creative ways we try to basically answer to both needs. One of them is that you can have a hyperlinked descriptive link text like this, and then follow it up with a parentheses and then the full URL. It's not ideal. I don't particularly think it looks great, but it does answer that issue. And I would even go so far as to maybe make a print version and an online version. That's also an easy thing. If you're doing a report, and you want to have the URL spelled out somewhere, use footnotes. So have it in descriptive link text in the paragraph, and then a footnote, and you can have the spelled out URL in the footnote. That would be okay. Also QR codes. So if you're doing outreach materials that you're printing out and taking to events, or brochures, things like that, use QR codes. Big caveat on that is not using third-party generated QR codes. Those can have some cybersecurity risks. Plus, they will keep track of how many usage you get, and then they will try to charge you after. They kind of come in after the fact. QR codes are really easy to make now. If you have a Canva account, you can make them in Canva. You can also actually, if you use Microsoft Edge, you can actually just right-click on a page, and there's a create QR code right there for you. It doesn't do anything pretty. Like in Canva, you can make it different colors and add your logo and stuff like that. But it is a nice, quick way to make a QR code that you don't really have to worry about. I think those are my best answers to the print question. We do say that, if you think about it from a user perspective, if you have a really crazy long URL, even not so crazy long, but somebody sees that in print, they're not going to take that and then come over and type that out one by one. But if you have descriptive link text, then they're going to Google it. So in this day and age, give them a title, give them a destination, they Google it, they find it, more than having them type out a URL. And we've had questions about shortened URLs, and we just avoid them as much as possible, but they're not completely like forbidden or anything, but we try to avoid them if we can. And change the style color. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say.
Yes, I would say for for most standard documents, it is best to keep the standard hyperlink color like this one here that we have. But for more stylized documents, so maybe, you know, brochures, flyers, um, short guidance documents, things like that. Definitely, if you're trying to go with a kind of a color theme, then you could change the color of the hyperlink, as like you said, as long as it's accessible. And especially if you have like a dark background, you're going to want to change that URL color to probably white or something like that, which we do often here. So when we put the full Zoom link for any hybrid meetings, what would be best practice for language around virtual attendance information on an agenda? Well, it's a good question, and I guess it's also the same would apply on how you're sharing that information. If you're sharing the agenda, okay, so if you're sharing the agenda as a PDF on your website, then having it be descriptive link text would be perfectly fine because they're going to be clicking on the link on the PDF from their computer, presumably, or from their phone or tablet. If it was an agenda that was going to be accessed in print, then I think you would need the full Zoom URL spelled out. But if most people are accessing it online, then having it be embedded in the text would be fine. We do that a lot with our agendas and on our events on our website is, you know, we just say join link or meeting link, and then we have it embedded in that text. Yeah, I might need to do two versions or do the parentheses thing here, or, you know, have a QR code also as a possibility. Yeah. Okay. Sure. All right, now we get into the fun stuff, the navigation and structure of documents. So these are, again, WCAG requirements that you have a title and tags in your document properties. You use heading styles and you use them in a numbered order. And that goes to the bottom bullet there of a linked table of contents. So if you're using heading styles appropriately, then you're going to have an easy setup for a linked table of contents, which is very important. It's also important to have a table of contents for documents that are over 5 pages, especially if there are a lot of subsections. So you want to have that navigation piece of digital accessibility comes into play here. And one of the reasons for title and tags in document properties, and I will quickly show you what we're talking about here. If you're in file and info, this thing needs a title. Look at me, I don't even have it here. So you've got your properties right here, and this is where you would add the title and some tags. The tags are for search engine purposes more than accessibility. So that's just a good practice to get into if you want your information to be quickly picked up in a search engine. You want to add some tags there. The title is important because that's actually the first thing that gets read by a screen reader. So if you open up a PDF and you have your screen reader on, it reads the title from the document properties before it gets to anything else. It's also important because it's actually what shows up in the browser tab when you're looking at your documents online. And this is an example of that, right? So this right here in the tab of your browser is what is in that document's title, properties title area. And we've actually gotten dinged by this a few times because before we really understood that fact, we had properties or titles that were not, maybe a document was copied and used for the next year's report, and then it would still have the old year's title in it. And somebody's looking at this document that says 2025 Air Resources Report, and then the tab up is saying 2018 Air Resources Report, and we would actually get questions like, why, what is going on here? So it's actually, besides accessibility, just a really good habit to get into to make sure that we're not confusing people and that we have some clear indication of what these documents are all the way up in the tab of the browser. Now, for section headings, excuse me, it's very important that you're using styles, so this styles area here, and that you're going in order from heading 1, 2, 3, etc. So again, I told you that sometimes keyboard shortcuts are being used by people with screen readers, and they're tabbing through, just trying to get to the different chapters and the different headings. And if it skips from heading 1 to heading 3, confusion, where's heading 2, did I miss a section, that sort of thing. So it's having that easy navigation for the user is very important. And you want to get in the habit of using styles to set up your documents rather than modifying the text here. So instead of saying like, yeah, great, this is technically heading 3, but I want it to look like heading 4, so I'm just going to change it to heading 4. That's not going to work. It's going to give the wrong order of tags. So instead, you should be changing heading 3 to look like you want it to look. So if you want that to change, then you can actually come up to styles and right click and click on modify and just change it all. You know, maybe you wanted it to be 12 instead of 14, and we needed to get a stronger font there. It's already bold. Okay. You can do all of that here. You can do the paragraph spacing, so you can actually, you know, maybe you want more space after heading 3 or before it. You can do all of that right here. And then just like with, well, you can set the default over there, but, and then you can just make sure that I always have automatically update selected. And then when you change that, it's going to change it throughout the document for any other heading 3s. So like, okay, that's my heading 3 now. So definitely do as much as you can up here in styles rather than changing everything down here. And when you do that, like I said, it's helpful for the accessibility and having the tags be appropriate when it's a PDF. But also when you're inserting your table of contents, you've got your, you should have an easy go of it. So when you go to references, table of contents, add your table, because a lot of things on this document have, you know, we're using the headers, the heading styles. We have it right here, easy, all set up for me. If I decided I didn't want to use that many headings, I could come over here to custom, and I could say, you know what, I don't want all 3 levels. I just want heading 1 and heading 2. You can make all kinds of adjustments here, as I'm sure most of you are aware. But this is also hyperlinked now. We're going to go backwards, but that's okay. But you can click on there and go back to the area. That is a requirement of WCAG to have that hyperlinked table of contents. So using styles as you're creating your document, as you're going throughout, will help you to add the table of contents and have that requirement all checked off on the checkbox. And let me get back to where I was. Any questions about that part? Oh yes, the navigation pane. Thank you, Brian. Favorite tool for checking heading structure and long documents is going to the view and the navigation pane. Great point. Yes, that is a great thing to have on, especially if you have one of those long documents, right? Magdalene, yes, thank you. I did not prepare that tool, but I will try to get it up. So Magdalene's asking about no more than 25 words in a sentence, and how do we check for this? And there are some plain language tools, and And yes, we will touch on that. So let's see if we can find that together when I get down to that section. Okay. So let's keep going. All right, so we were talking about inline images. So the requirement is that graphics are in line with text, not using text wrap to get the look that you want. And this can be counterintuitive to a lot of people because it's just such an easy, handy tool, right? Like this is an example of a text or an image that is using text wrap. If you look at the layout options here on the side, it's got text wrapping, right? And it looks nice and it's just the way we want it. Problem is that screen readers will get confused because if you kind of click on this and you move it around, it's kind of free floating, right? It can be moved anywhere and it looks nice. Well, that doesn't quite look nice, but you know what I mean. You can make it look nice. Problem being the screen reader doesn't understand where to go. So it's going to read this alt text, but it might read it like it is removed by image of an excavator doing blah, 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 and then breaking up the rock and extracting the gold, so it's not reading it in the right order and it can be confusing. So the answer to this is to have your images be in line with text, which is the very top layout option right here. And it quite literally is in the line with the text. And you can still move it, but it's going to look a little different. And when you click on it and move it around, now the image is not moving, but your cursor is. So you can see my cursor moving, and I can say I want it. Nobody does, but oh, I want it right here. Well, it's going to be right there in line with text. We don't want that. Okay, we want it after the paragraph. Great. But we also don't want it to look like this. This isn't nice looking, right? This big white space here, that's not going to work for us. So the trick that we use most often here at DES is making a 2-column section. And I'll show you what that looks like. So we'll highlight the image. I think I highlighted the image and the paragraph. And we'll go up to layout, columns, and 2 columns. Okay, so now this guy, he wasn't highlighted, so he's not in there. So I can actually drag him up, back up to here where the cursor is, let go. Great, but we want this word to be down here on this side. So what we would do is put our cursor up here and go to breaks and column break. So that brings this down here and this over here. It's not always ideal. There are a lot of tweaks you can still do. So you can actually, change the size of the image to make it kind of match up with the paragraph a little more. It might go off the margins a bit, but you could make that a style choice for your document. The images don't have to be completely in line with your margins, or you can work on changing the space between columns, which if you double click on this area up here, you have your column settings, and you can deselect equal column width, and you can say, I want this column over here to be wider than this one, or vice versa, and I don't want that much space in between. You can, oh, don't do that. You can make changes like that to get your, can do a little bit up here with this, right? So you can do some things to kind of make it work. And then here, I'm just going to delete this and get that back up. And that's how we will handle 2-column table with, yeah, so that's the other thing that we do sometimes. I'm sorry, Magdalene asked if it was appropriate to fix it using a 2-column table with no borders. That is an option. And I think that it's a decent one. The one issue that sometimes comes up, I think it might be if it's overused, is when you convert it to a PDF, the tags, it's tagged as a table, and that might get a little confusing. But there are ways to either fix the tags in PDF, or sometimes if you auto tag it, it corrects itself and doesn't have it. So it would just be something to pay attention to when you turn it into a PDF to make sure it hasn't confused the tags very much. But yes, that's something that we certainly have done here, where you would insert a table and then you would just have your text in one and your photo in the other, still in line. You still want to make sure it's in line. And then you would just make sure those borders are not there. No borders. And then you can kind of manipulate that as well to make it, the right size that you want and that sort of thing. So some clients prefer there be only a single heading 1 in a PDF document. Yeah, we're fine with multiple heading 1s as long as they are following that parent-child structure. Honestly, I prefer, especially if it's a report with a title page, I prefer title as the title style for the title. And then if you have multiple chapters, we have people who have done heading 1 to be each chapter, and then the parent-child structure within that chapter. And I think that's perfectly fine. So the other thing is text boxes. Now, we really want to avoid text box use as much as possible. Again, the screen reader will read across and not really understand, especially because excuse me, sorry. But yeah, it won't really understand that it's not supposed to read from left to right, or it might read it in the wrong place. So you really, to be able to control the order that things are read, you want to do a different approach. And oftentimes that is using the column, again, the column structure, but using a color box background instead of this text box. So this is a text box right here. But if I wanted to instead make it go, so I wanted to read it in order of this paragraph and this paragraph, right? Let's get rid of this guy and make this 2 columns. And then I can make this, back to centered and like kind of pull quotey looking. And then you can actually use your shapes. Oops. Insert shapes and insert a background shape. And you can send it backward all the way to the back. Why didn't that work? Change the color. Oopsies. Shape. Okay. Shape format. There we go. Maybe we want it back to that light gray. Not sure why it didn't go all the way back though. Oh, send behind text, sorry. Send behind text. Now we don't want that outline there, but that's fine for now. But then you just want to make sure that you're marking it as decorative, like we said. So you're going to view alt text, mark as decorative. So the screen reader is going to read this paragraph and then read this and then move on to the next section. You can actually use this kind of style, like using a shape for color, and if you want to add some flourish to your decoration easily, because like we said, they don't need to be in line because they're marked as decorative. So even if it's not a box of text or a pull quote, or it's just something like, just kind of a design that you want to add, as long as you've got it behind the text marked as decorative, that is absolutely okay to do. You can get pretty creative with it, actually. Okay, data tables, I think we're making good time. I just want to make sure we get to the plain language and the PDFs. But data tables are quite a big topic. So I'm going to take one quick little swig before I get started. Okay, so the requirements for accessibility for data tables is that they don't have merged or split cells. There are a few exceptions we'll talk about. That they don't have empty cells. They have a clear, unobstructed header row. And you keep the table title and notes outside the table. So it's all about how a screen reader is going to read these tables. And the screen reader keeps track of a header and then reads the data underneath it. So it's going to say every time it gets to a new row, it's going to repeat the header and then the content. Header, content, down to the next one, header, content. If there are split cells or merged cells across columns, it's going to get confusing. If sometimes there are subheaders in a table where you're splitting up categories, then it's still reading the first header row, but now you're in a different section. That's going to get confusing. So it's very important. Same thing with having empty cells. It's reading this, and then it doesn't say blank. It doesn't say nothing. It does say nothing. It just goes on to the next thing. So hard to keep track of where someone is in a table when that sort of thing is happening. So this is an example of a perfectly fine table. No split or merged cells. Very clear. And the title is above the table. That's very important. I think I have an example below of what it looks like when, sometimes we get these a lot, where the title is actually in its own merged cell, and that is going to mess up the screen reader. So that you want to just take that out. And then what you can also do, which will help you if you have a list of tables in your table of contents or something like that, is when you have your title here, you give it the caption style, so it will be easily captured later. And then if there were notes at the bottom, like this one has notes, you want to just not have that in a table cell and have it just be under the table on the page itself. So that's an easy fix. Take this out, put it above, and caption it or give it the style of a caption. Now, oh, did I do it twice? No, okay. So then we have an example of what we would say are exceptions to the merged cell rule. And that is when it's merged across or merged vertically, I guess you could say, across rows instead of columns. And the reason this works is because it's not obstructing the data from the header, right? If you had it going across, you could be like, which header goes with this content. With this one, it's very clear. And a test to see if it's working or if it's in the order that you want is to actually click in the first cell and just start hitting tab on your keyboard. So you can see how it's going to be read by a screen reader. It's going to go here, there, right? Pollutant. Then it's going to the second row, pollutant. So that's going to be clear what data goes with each row. It's going to keep going back to this one pollutant, right? Another thing is I mentioned where you have multiple like subheadings in a table. And so this is a helpful way to categorize your table, right? So it makes sense to have these be the same because they have the same heading, it's the same data. But like I said, it will confuse a screen reader because it's always going to be reading this first row as a header, and even when you're down in some other section. So one not so pretty fix is to make them separate tables and have a separate table for each one. That could become a problem if you have a bunch. But another thing you could do is use the merged cells across rows to categorize these a little bit better. So you think about each one of these is a category, right? It's a new type of project. So why don't we just add a new column at the front for type of project, put A here, and then have your project have, a new name for this project description. And then you put all of that here, and then you still have these are the same throughout. So I'm just going to make this on one page. So here you go. Now you have the category, and if you tab through, it's going to keep going back to that category. So it's not going to be confusing on which category you're in. And now we're at that one. So yep, that's going to keep reading it in the order that we want it to. And this one, excuse me for it being a little ugly, I apologize for that. It was an example of having the empty cells. Now, like I said, that will get confusing for someone using a screen reader. So some people will try to put an A. We try to avoid that as not applicable. We try to avoid that because it doesn't really, the screen reader, I think, might say nah, or it doesn't read it like NA, or it's not exactly clear what you're talking about. So, 0 or no data, unknown, not monitored, something like that. Like it needs to be a little more specific. Now, there is a way that you can do this without it still being visual, and that is by using white text. So if you did not want, you want these definitely to be empty. You don't want to add, any more information for the visual user, then you can actually include this information and then change the font to white. And what will happen is, as you can imagine, the screen reader is going to read that. The screen reader doesn't care what color the font is, so it's going to still read that content even though it's not visual on the page. So that's completely acceptable and something we've done in the past here. I know tables are a lot, and I know some of you make some really pretty tables and with a lot of information in them. So it is a lot to wrap your head around how to best manage that. One of the biggest things I say is it's, and I've said it before about alt text, it's all about being able to convey the information the best way possible. And sometimes if you need, you might consider having a visually appealing, very well categorized table with a companion table that is straight, straight, no fuss, no muss, like data, data, data. Just because we want to make sure that the user is able to access that information in some form. So if you think of it like a chart or a well-crafted table is a visual aid to the data, and then providing that data in a more no fuss, like straight to the point format for other users. That's an option. Do you prefer to have the header row set to repeat on each page? Absolutely. I think that's very important. And it won't, from what I've gathered in my testing on screen readers, it won't do that to a screen reader. Like that's just something that'll be visual and not picked up by a screen reader, because that could get confusing. Any questions I'm not seeing there, Christina, on the?
Yeah, there was one, the one just above the one you just read. For PDFs, when you are including combined cells for a complex table, do you make sure to update the span tags to ensure that they match the tab structure of what you'd see in a Word doc?
Combined cells for a complex table. I have not done that. I do check the table tags to make sure that they're in the right order. I don't know that I've specifically updated the span tags, but if you have an example of that, I would definitely take a look, because it might be something that I've missed or not really had any experience with. Because yeah, usually there's a regularity when you're running the accessibility checker in PDF. The regularity will get flagged when there's these merged cells, like I was just showing with the categories. And I check to make sure that the tags are in order, but um, I I think that might be enough. But if there's something else I'm missing, I'm happy to look into that. Years. Oh yeah. Yeah, the merged header rows. So like on the first row spanning across, like the example you're giving here is having the year and then having the months underneath. Um, those are tricky, and those I did not bring an example of that one. Those do need a different approach. Those will confuse a screen reader for sure. So, I mean, we have had situations where people maybe put a type of measurement as a span across, and then it would be, different types of pollutants or something like that. And, uh, we had to just go in and actually add the measurement. So say this was phosphorus and we, put a measurement in parentheses, and then the next one, and then the measurement in parentheses. So sometimes it does create that kind of redundancy where you're trying to avoid the redundancy by having it span over like this. Um, Unfortunately, that's just not going to be accessible. So we do have to find ways to get around that. Um, and then I guess you could like add a row or a column that said year, and then have like this one right here, like year, and then it would be 2025, and they would all have that be, every row would have 2025. Thank you, Stephanie. Yes, a small example would be great. If a table is made with Excel and included at the end of a document, is there an impact if the header is created in the first few rows of the worksheet versus in the actual page setup header section? So my question would be if you are adding the Excel document, like are you merging it as a PDF after the fact, or are you adding it to the Word document itself? Because Excel documents, by their nature, are really, really difficult to make accessible. And I know that I am PDF after the fact. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there would be an impact. It would definitely be something that has to be checked in the PDF. Here's a good question for everybody. I wouldn't assume, but that everybody has access to Adobe Pro with all of the accessibility tools in them. If you don't, let me know. But when I show you the tagging structure and everything in a PDF, I can show you what, if I have the right example, I can show you what to look for. So I would say with the Excel document, you're converting it to a PDF, then opening it up and checking all the tags. And as long as you can, and you can manually select the header row and make them the heading tags, then that's probably the best approach, is to do that. And then when you merge it with the full document, hopefully like all that carries over. That would be my approach to that. I think that's all of the questions. And just a quick note, not that many of you probably work with layout tables, but all of this is strictly for data tables. Layout tables do not have these same requirements, and layout tables are more used for forms and other other kinds of documentation. And so if you're thinking data tables only in all of this content, if that helps you at all. So I didn't have it teed up, but I'm going to look for that plain language. Let me see if I can find it here. I did mean to mention, if not everybody knows, definitely use the review check accessibility tool in your Word document. I mentioned having all of this, done with accessibility in mind at the jump, even though there still will be some things that you might have to change on a PDF once it's converted. This will get you most of the way. And so you could even have this running the whole time you're working and kind of go back and see if you're good or not. Sometimes it used to have a plain language thing, but I'm not seeing it. So let me see if I can find that for you. So the Plain Language Act, basically, we need, why is it doing that? Okay, Plain Writing Act, sorry. So one of the resources I provided in that document for everybody was our publication guide for vendors that we have on our website. And it's pretty much everything that we have internally that we provide for people like you who work with us all the time, and let you know what our requirements are. And we have this Plain Writing Act section here, which is basically our communication needs to be as clear and understandable as possible. We're really supposed to be having our information at a reading and grade level of 8th grade. Obviously, with a lot of our technical and scientific reports, that's not possible throughout the document, but the key is to provide at least an executive summary or a small section of a report that does break it down into that 8th grade reading level, so that somebody can get the information conveyed to them at the front of a document, and then it gets technical after that. So we do have this reading and grade level calculator link here. There are quite a few online. I think this one is one of the standard ones, right? So you can actually just copy and paste your text. I'm not going to have a good example right now into that. And that's where the question came up about having 25 words per sentence. And that's where that, it comes from that plain writing act. This is, I don't know what this is going to do, but this is just the intro paragraph to our Green Snow Pro website, which is giving it a college graduate level, probably because of these right here, I would imagine. So there's a little bit of massaging that you can do, but at the same time, your audience. So we had an example of someone who was creating a form for wastewater operators, and everything that he put into this was college graduate level, and he was having to take out the names of equipment and different tools that they had to use. And so at that point, it's like, okay, your audience is this technical person who needs to know these names. So we can't catch everybody with everything, but especially for our reports and our outreach documents, we need to at least convey the information at an 8th grade level at some point, right? So have that executive summary at the beginning, explaining what this is all about, and then get into the technical stuff after. I hope that helps. And I don't think this shows the, I don't think this shows how many words are in a sentence, but yeah, there are other ones out there that would. We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to do a little home editor document stats. Is that in Word? Editor. Aha. Okay. So in home editor document stats, we've got spelling, grammar, conciseness. Okay. Okay. That's going to be some weird stats probably. Oh, that's also what's down here, right? Great. Love it. Thank you. Readability statistics right here. I think it's also here. Not everything. Okay. Great. Thank you for that. Yes. So this will give you your words per sentence. And you've got your Flesch-Kincaid, which is what we were just at. Your Flesch-Kincaid score here too. This is great. This is a good resource. Thank you for sharing that. So let me jump over in the short time we have left to look at a PDF. So obviously the majority of the documents posted online are converted to PDF. The only ones not usually are templates or some forms. So when, oh, and a good thing to know about converting to PDF actually, while I have you, is we have found here that it's really important to save as a PDF. So save as and do the drop down and change it to PDF. The PDF converter in Word, so either print, well, printing to PDF really has some downfalls. The PDF converter in Word, that's this like just converts it straight to PDF, sometimes works, but when people print to PDF, oftentimes things go missing like alt text. Hyperlinks are not active. You can't actually click on them. So I definitely tell people to avoid doing that because you lose a lot of that accessibility work that you've done. So maybe get in the habit of using the save as. And then when you have it as a PDF, you want to do a check. If you have Adobe Pro, you want to do a check on this document now, the final check on accessibility, which you can do here. Prepare for accessibility. If that doesn't show up automatically, I would assume most people have that as a tool they use often, but if not, you can always go to view more and find it. And then check for accessibility. This is going to run a check of everything. Another key point to check and make sure that this is 31 of 32 in the checking options. There's a bunch of different things it checks, right? And there's a drop down with all this stuff. You want it checking everything. I forget what the one thing is. Oh, tables must have a summary is not a requirement in yet in level 2A or level 2, I don't think. So that's the only one that is not selected. But then you hit start checking and you get your bolded items as your failures or manual checks. So it's always going to tell you check your reading order manually and the color contrast manually. It can't do that for you. You should have already been doing the color contrast along the way, so that should be fine. And then the reading order I'll show you in a minute. And then the content, it's going to say that some things aren't tagged. And when you click on the things that it's flagging, it's going to highlight it for you. In this instance, these things are decorative elements that don't need to be tagged because everything that's tagged is readable by a screen reader. So in this case, with these decorative elements, we don't want them to be read by a screen reader. They should just be ignored anyway. So that's fine. But if you see something that's not tagged, you might need to look into it. If it says everything's not tagged, then you're going to want to go to automatically tag your PDF. And that might be an issue of if you've printed it to PDF, because that sometimes happens. And then alt text is, I think it's going to be those same things, right? It's these elements that we can ignore. So I just also wanted to show you how to see the tags and kind of, all this stuff we've been talking about with Word and making sure it's tagged properly. And this is that area. So you've got your accessibility tags here. Every element that needs to be read by the screen reader should have a tag on it. And you can click on it and get it highlighted to see where it is. We've got heading 1, heading 2. You can hover over your images usually and see if there's alt text for them. Also, you can check alt text over here. Make sure that's all good. So here we go, just clicking through. You can also see if something has all those extra paragraph markings, because if I highlight the whole thing, every tag, so it's like this big drop down hierarchy. If I highlight all the tags and all of a sudden I see it might get upset with me for trying to do that, but if there are a bunch of paragraph breaks, you're going to see a little blank thing highlighted pink all throughout the page. Now it's confusing. It's confused because there's so many tags. It's a large document and it's frozen. Okay. So please, there we go. If this was created by somebody hitting enter a bunch of times, you would see this little paragraph thing there, you would see that all over, and you know that you had a problem. Here's a table. So we have a table here. Got your header row. You just keep drilling down, and you can see TH for table header. And then you've got, so it's a little different, but you can kind of see, you can drill down all the way to what the content is in all of these. So if you're trying to check to see if everything's in the right order, make sure it's all highlighted together, you can do that. And lastly, I know we're getting so close, is the reading order. And that's the thing that they said manually check. So you just want to see that everything it's got a little number in the corner, and that's actually the reading order of the document. And check and make sure that it's all in order. If something is not in order, it can get a little tricky depending on the item. So here we do have everything in order, but if I well, let's say we want to make sure this guy's the logo is being read under the title. Move it up to be, so I clicked on it with my mouse and I moved up and I'm dropping it here. And this little guy is not really necessary. You can actually click on him and delete, and sometimes that makes things go cuckoo, so hopefully not. I'm going to hit delete. All right, it didn't really help me, but that's okay. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, I didn't really allot a whole time to go into PDF remediation because honestly, if the documents are created with all of this in mind and the things that we went over today, the PDFs should be real smooth sailing. That's the goal anyway, is to make it so that when we get to the PDF, minor tweaks, ready to go. You can also check your document properties to make sure you've got the title in there, and then you should be all set. So we got to 12. Amazing. I am here to answer some more questions. You don't have to jump off right away. If you want to ask me something more specific to your work, or please feel free to reach out to your partners at DES or to myself for additional questions. I hope the resources help you as well. And if you have any other ideas for how we can help, we are all ears. So thank you very much, everybody.
You're going to post that recording, Jana?
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be
It was a lot
likely.
of intel. I need to watch it again.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, it will be posted for sure. I'll share it out to the whole group. If not later today, then definitely by tomorrow.
And when you post that to Teams, will that be stored as a Teams video, meaning in about 30 days it'll get deleted if it's not copied somewhere else?
No, you can turn off the expiration on videos, so I always go and do that automatically. And I'll be sharing it on our internal SharePoint and Teams, but I'll also be sharing it probably through an unlisted YouTube link so that our external partners have access to it as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you, everyone.